Good morning, everyone. Today we are going to be beginning our unit on narrative. So, narrative is story, it's storytelling, and we're going to be focusing on narrative fiction. Uh, this mini lesson today is going to be on the central dramatic argument of your story, of any story. And we're going to be looking at central dramatic argument, what it is, and how to determine the central dramatic argument of your story. So, let's dive in here. So, what makes a great story? Um, that's a question I think a lot of people would like to have an answer to. Writers, filmmakers, people that use story to tell, to tell a story that that is touching and sort of universally understandable through theme and character and relationships. And so, I think what we'll try to do in this unit is answer that question to the best of our ability. So for me, there are five things that make a great story. There's the central dramatic argument, which is the theme. There's the structure of the story, and this can be an important tool to telling your story in the best way possible. Um, I would say that there is no real structure to your structure. Structure happens almost as an afterthought as you are exploring the story that you've created and the characters and their relationships to one another and to the central dramatic argument. Um, Beginning, middle, and end, that's just the start of different styles of structure that you might try to use to tell a story in the best way possible. And then obviously character, right? Character is why we care about stories. Characters are who we relate to and who we see ourselves in. They give us the ability to think outside of ourselves and sort of live their choices with them to see how we would feel in that same situation. So every character you have should be not likable necessarily, but relatable, right? You would likely relate to a hero as well as you would a villain, depending on what the villain's motivations are, right? You can relate to different characters based on what you understand about why they're doing the things they're doing, why they made the choices they made. And so you don't have to have likable characters, but they need to be relatable in some way. Your characters should have flaws, right? And these flaws relate to their relationships, the conflict in the story, and the central dramatic argument. So character flaws can be, not necessarily like flaws. Like in Finding Nemo, Nemo's fin was a flaw, right? But also in Finding Nemo, his father's overprotectiveness was a flaw. And both of those things related to the central dramatic argument in that story. So it can be as big as, like I have schizophrenia, to as small as I don't like wearing nylon socks, right? Like it can be anything. It just needs to be something that would reasonably deviate from what we would consider socially normal. And that also plays a role somehow in that character's relationships or in the conflict or relates to the central dramatic argument. Every character you have has a goal, big or small. So, regardless if it's the main character or just somebody they meet on the street, you always have to plan that character with a goal in mind. And when that character is in a scene or a chapter, they need to be moving toward that goal somehow. They need to be active in trying to achieve that goal. Your characters have relationships with people, ideas, and institutions, and other things, right? And all of those relationships play a role in us being able to understand what that character is like, being able to understand, the goals of that character and how they're trying to achieve those goals. Many times, the relationships are a source of conflict, and so the meaning of that relationship can be something that is in conflict with the character trying to achieve their goals. But relationships are really one of the big things that we care about as a part of story, and you can take that from romantic comedy style stories all the way through action stories. The relationships between the characters are what's important to us. And the relationships should be real, not idealized. So In your stories, you don't want a relationship to have no flaws. You don't want it to be perfect because that's not relatable, right? We want our relationships between our characters to feel real. We don't want their days to go perfectly from beginning to end. We don't want all of their relationships, friendly and otherwise, to be the most ideal version of that. We want them to suffer in a way, just like we do in our friendships, in our romantic relationships, in our familial relationships. So we want to experience life kind of as it is, not in its ideal sense. Conflict, another massive part of story, right? A story without conflict is not a story. Um, and you think back to like fairy tales, right? There's always like a very distinct conflict, right? Like in Hansel and Gretel, there's a witch and she's going to eat them, right? That's the conflict. In Rapunzel, she's stuck in a tower. That's conflict. And so these are forces that keep the character from reaching their goals. And these can be either external or internal conflict, right? So if a character doesn't believe in themselves enough to think that they're capable of doing something, that's internal conflict because their doubt is keeping them from reaching a goal. So you should be writing stories that have one or both of these types of conflict. And then lastly, the thing that makes a great story is writing, right? It's the prose, which just means like writing, and imagery that you use to make your writing as colorful as necessary to tell your story. Every style of writing is different, right? So if you're writing, a naval action thriller style story, or if you're writing a witty, dry, sarcastic piece about whatever, like factory farms or something, like there's a style that fits that genre. And sometimes you try to bend that style depending on the genre you're writing in, to sort of set your prose apart, to make people want to lean into the story you're telling because they're hearing it in a different way. So you have to develop your own style of writing, your own prose and imagery, that is sort of specific to what you want to write. And you'll develop that by reading the things that you want to write. So we're going to be reading a lot, and you're going to be choosing the things to read that speak to the style of writing that you like. And the more you read that, the more you're exposed to it, and the more it starts to leak into your own writing. So these 5 things are what make a great story, and we're going to explore each of these things specifically throughout the week.